ensure safety, security, and survival. So in other words, what I'm telling you, us as human beings, we are driven unconsciously to drive for our safety, security, and survival. How do we do that? By staying in our known world. To stick with what works. To find the formula, to find the strategy. Keep in the space with what works. But as mentioned before, because of technology and because of disruption of technology, what worked in the past plain and simply can't work in the future. And the problem is, if we stay in the known world and we stay operating, living the way that we're living, nothing will ever change. This is our comfort zone. The only people that are going to survive in the way that the world is moving through all the disruption is the creative people. Because as soon as anything can become automated, as soon as a program or an app can be created in any industry, that entire industry gets disrupted. So a beautiful analogy here is if we look at Kodak. Kodak used to be a multi-billion-dollar business. When digital cameras came out, Kodak saw something, and they saw this, and they thought it was absolutely brilliant. They put all their time, all their resources, and all their energy into developing and innovating and making a better digital camera. But unfortunately, behind the scenes, a little thing called a cell phone came up and disrupted an entire industry. It turned a multi-billion-dollar business just about overnight, just about bankrupt, because they got disrupted by technology. A lot of us here, when is the last time anybody here in the last year, has anybody in here in the last year gone and bought a digital camera? Okay? In the last year, who here has got a new cell phone? Okay. So just to show you how powerful technology actually is. Okay? To the extent where it's working now, where I can go and I can say, okay, Google, where do I live?
Here is a map of 27 Jupiter Street, Kleinfontein R, Boxburg, 1459.
Cancel that on the recording, please. All right. So what I'm hitting at here, at some point, people are going to be able to have a conversation with Google rather than you as a person. So how do you stand out? How do you stay creative? How do you stay relevant? And the only way that you can do that, and the only way I can advise, is by hanging out in your genius. But there's always a catch to something, isn't there? If something's too good to be true, there's always a catch. So what's the catch of your genius? We need to start hanging out in the unknown. Now, a lot of us don't like playing in the unknown. We don't like testing new waters, testing new horizons, because it jeopardizes our safety, security, and survival. So I've just given you an illustration of how you can get disrupted by technology. But on the other side of the coin, there's people who you can also become a disruptor. So if we look at the company called Garmin, what do we all know Garmin for? GPS, isn't it? When was the last time any of you went out to buy a GPS, by show of hands, in the last year? Absolutely no one. One person. Awesome. Okay, so one person out of 160 in the last year has bought a GPS system. Why? Because it's here on a cell phone, isn't it? Alrighty. So Garmin actually saw the disruption coming in. So what did Garmin do? Say again? Sold their maps. Okay, that's one element, but how did they hit the market? How did they change the market? They stepped into fitness. Now, you go buy a Garmin watch, the GPS follows you, and you can see exactly where you ran, exactly where you rode your bicycle, exactly what your heart rate was, etc., etc., etc. And they created an entire new industry. Now, every single one of us have this ability. Because remember, what is creativity? It's just connecting two dots that have never been connected before. Now, every single one of you in here are unique, and you can stand out to be unique. And you can use technology to your favor to stay in that space, and you can stay relevant. All right? So coming back to the genius, do you know that NASA conducted a study on what makes somebody genius? Well, how do you find somebody who's genius? So they got two psychologists together. Why would NASA want to pinpoint genius? It's because NASA wanted to stay relevant. How did they want to stay relevant? How did they want to stay on top of their game? By creating innovators, getting genius people to come in and innovate new technology. So they got two psychologists to come in to devise a test that anybody could undertake. And this test was so effective that it worked so powerfully and effectively that they decided to run an experiment. They took 1,600 4 to 5-year-old kids. They ran the same test on those 1,600 kids. Of that 1,600, 98% of them had an inherent genius. They reconducted that study 5 years later. So in other words, when they were in grade 5, they reconducted the same study. Only 30% of them were left with that innate genius. Now, it wasn't a new 1,600 kids, the exact same 1,600 kids. Only 30% of them were left with that innate genius. 5 years later, in other words, in grade 10, they reconducted the same test and they were down to 12%. So my question is, what happened here? There's a little thing called the educational system. Now, I'm not here to badmouth education because education has its place. But what I am here to do is to question, does the educational system serve its purposes in the modern day and in the modern world? If we set a new syllabus today, by tomorrow, that syllabus is irrelevant. Now, our educational system has been set way back, and it was based on the Industrial Revolution. So what does that mean? If our educational system was based on the Industrial Revolution, it was there and it was created to teach us to become a robot. So in other words, it was to teach us to learn something, become really effective at that thing, excuse me, and continuously do that thing over and over and over. Don't think outside the box, because if you do anything outside the box, you will be reprimanded. You will be shunned. If you can do a maths problem and you can do it a different way to the way that the teachers taught you, you are wrong. So what are they telling you there? What are they prepping us for? What are they nurturing us for? They're nurturing us and prepping us to become a robot. But unfortunately, with technology, that job, or that way of being, is irrelevant. And we haven't been taught how to cope with what's coming. How do we move forward? How do we actually stay relevant? How do we actually be creative? Because what we taught is pick up a book, learn that book, study that book, parrot that book, and then go regurgitate it in a 2-hour exam and see how much of it you can do effectively. If you don't, you are told that you're wrong, that you're bad, and you're a failure. Okay? But the way that the world is moving, we need to be able to create. We need to be able to innovate. We need to be able to adapt. And we haven't been taught to do that. So what I'm telling you is that we've been taught to become solution-oriented, or not solution, we've been taught to become process-orientated and system-orientated rather than end-result-orientated. When we get caught up in a problem, do you know that your mind falls back into the same neurological pathway that created the problem in the first place? So what am I telling you? When we set out to solve a problem, we just literally recreate that problem. Okay? Think about it in your relationship. If you've been in a relationship, you see a problem, you set out to solve that problem with your partner, and what actually happens with that problem? It actually explodes and it becomes a lot bigger than it was in the beginning, isn't it? Because we go straight back into the problem. So if I'm telling you process orientation isn't a way of operating, what is the way of operating? It's end result orientation. We haven't been taught to think in favor of end results. What's the actual end result? All of us, when we set out to solve a problem, when we want something, first thing first, what we look for is how do I get there? We never look at what do I actually want. And I know this because I've worked with thousands of people, and myself included. Whenever I ask people, what do you actually want? Everybody will tell me what you must do to get there, what you need to do to get there, but nobody can go pinpoint specifically, or there's a very small percentage at least, can actually pinpoint and say specifically, this is what I want. This is where I'm going.